and add them there. Welcome, Joe. And just again saying we will be recording this, guys. So if you're not comfortable with anything, just let us know and we'll remove it from the recording. All right, you want to kick us off, Michael?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Tess. So we're kicking off here about 5 minutes past the hour. We got the whole hour booked in. This is Michael Markides, Holistic Analytics, also with Tasman Murray from beautiful sunny Melbourne, about midday. So this webinar is marketing analytics. So I think Taz and I had a chat about different ways we can help out in the obvious situation that we're all enduring right now. So thank you. I see friends from Australia, friends from the US that have joined in their evening. So I feel like the agenda is going to be about probably 15-20 minutes of us giving a little bit of background on marketing analytics. So it's going to be a little bit about definitions, a little bit about kind of common nomenclature and how we can think about it. And then we're going to move on to a Q&A. And so if you can see the chat that we have on the Hangouts here as we go, when you have questions, please do feel free to add them to the chat. I'm going to try to effectively MC here and collect those questions, and then we'll be able to circle them back probably about 20 or 25 minutes past the hour. After that, we're going to head into a little bit more use case, a little bit more business-oriented language to review, and then another Q&A. So we've got a few different places. And then finally, I just wanted to add a note before Taz gets cracking is we're running a series here. It's going to be about, hopefully, at least 3 webinars, maybe 4. As you can imagine, it's difficult for us to maybe understand what exactly people want to know or what they want to learn. So if you have any feedback, of course, either through your questions, through the chat, or offline about what you like, what you need, what you want, please do share with us, and that'll obviously allow us to make the content as valuable as we can. So thank you again. With that, give it to Taz.
Cool. Thanks and welcome, guys. Obviously, we're talking about analytics, specifically marketing analytics here. One of the first things probably we need to cover off is what is analytics. At its core, analytics is using information to solve a problem. This can include data science. This can include a whole range of other solutions. It can be as complicated or as easy as you like, but in the end, you're just trying to solve problems with information you have to hand. When we talk about marketing analytics, what we generally talk about is attribution. So let's try and understand what attribution is first, and we're going to use a topic that all of you should be familiar with, which is not questions you asked. So I've missed the slide, which is a good start. Some of the questions that we've already had posed to us. What can marketing analytics accomplish for my business? We'll cover that off. Where is multi-touch attribution heading in a post-cookie world? That is a massive question, which we will get to. We'll cover a little bit of that off. Some of the people on this call are probably really invested in that question as well. So it's a really touchy one, but we'll touch on it a little bit when we're talking about digital attribution, and we can have room for questions around that as well. What digital tools should I be using? That's kind of like if you're making some clothing. A, how long is the piece of string? B, what color is it? C, what's the clothing for? And D, why are you making clothing? So in order to understand what digital tools you should be using, you really need to understand what the problem is and whether or not a digital tool is what's required to start with. This next question, I think, got put in there by my mum, so we'll ignore that one. What are the challenges between digital and retail channels? We'll cover that off in our use case. And what does this mean specifically for B2B marketers? We'll try and cover that off a little bit later on as well. So we'll try and get to most of these questions. Anyway, attribution is what we were talking about and something you can all relate to at the moment. If we talk about attribution in terms of the current virus, if you're in the medical field at the moment, you're trying to understand what caused the virus to spread. So you're trying to attribute a reason for it spreading to a particular person, or for a person getting it, to one person or a group of people. So when we're talking about this kind of thing, there's a range of ways we can look at it. If you're talking about the person self-isolating, they're probably not very responsible for spreading the virus. If you're talking about a whole cruise ship that's come in, they're probably responsible for 60% of the virus cases you're seeing. People practicing social distancing might be responsible for a little bit less. The first known case here might be responsible for a couple. People can dancing together, probably responsible for a few more. And an infected person on a flight, again, probably responsible for quite a few more again. So just trying to use a simple example there of how you attribute something across different groups. When we do this in marketing analytics, it's trying to attribute your sale or your leads to the actual channels you've been using. The difference with marketing attribution here is we're not trying to attribute to one sale, one particular channel in particular. It may actually be across a range of channels. So what we can look at here is how your TV campaign has actually driven sales itself, but also how has it changed your search performance? How has your offline campaign and your sponsorship affected your digital channels? So it's not looking at just how much does one channel drive sales and how much money can you get out of that one channel if you put the money in, but it's also how can that channel have an interplay with these other channels. And it's that kind of synergy that's really important for companies to understand, and something that most attribution solutions kind of skip over a little bit. Why is this important? If any of you have worked in marketing, currently work in marketing, or have worked with marketers before, you'll be really familiar with the idea of gut feel. This morning, I had the gut feel that I should have a 5-cheese toastie. This was apparently the wrong idea, and my body's regretting that at the moment. In marketing, people always run with what is their gut feel, or historically have often run with what is their gut feel. They've had a bit of information from white papers from different companies, research from different agencies and publishers on what they should do, but it's not always been certain exactly what channels are working, what channels aren't, and they've been trying to work it off what their reach is, what their frequency is, and a range of other metrics. And the reason this has caused a lot of problems for a lot of marketers, especially CMOs, is because it's the least understood area of the business. It's often the most common area of the business to have its budget slashed. 11% of the total company budgets on average are going towards marketing at the moment. And it's the easiest thing for a company to cut because they cannot draw a direct line between that and profitability or that and revenue. So if you are anyone else in the C-suite apart from a CMO, you're generally talking to ROI. If you talk to most CMOs, you'll hear them talk about, again, reach, frequency, CPM, CPA, all of these metrics, which to anybody outside of marketing makes absolutely no sense. So if you're talking to your marketing analytics team, or if you're talking to your CEO, he's going to have no idea what you're talking about. He wants to know what the ROI is. How much money are you going to make for him if he gives you $1 million? And that's why marketing analytics is really important in this day and age. It also means that if you're talking to the board, you can justify the spend you're getting. There's a few different types of attribution. The most common that most of you will know is digital attribution. A lot of you will have heard the term last click attribution, which is what Google Analytics plays with really nicely. It's not terribly useful, but it's really common. Marketing mix modeling is kind of a short to medium term attribution. And then we've got a longer term attribution, which kind of runs over 6 months to 3 years. We say here digital attribution is very short term. If there's any digital marketers on the call, they'll be a bit upset by this probably. GA generally has a 90-day look back window, so you can get information going back that far, but most of digital attribution just looks at the very bottom of the funnel. There's a whole lot needs to be done to fill the rest of the funnel, so digital attribution become more effective. If all you're doing is spending all of your money on digital attribution, you might get a lot of success in the short term, but in the longer term, you'll run into problems. And this brings us to some of the risks that come along with data and analytics. It's not so much a risk of data and analytics per se, it's a risk of people misusing data and analytics. A little bit of knowledge goes a long way, a little bit of knowledge can be really dangerous, which is kind of the problem here. With the rise of digital, we've also seen the rise of short-termism in marketing. Short-termism kind of refers to people just focusing on the metrics they can see, and digital gives you a wealth of metrics you can see that are all very, very short-term metrics. So they can see something go up today, they spend some money, it goes up, they spend some other money, it goes down. So they'll spend the money that made it go up in that very short term. And the focus for a lot of companies has just been around improving those very short-term spikes, not understanding how the rest of the company actually works in order to drive those spikes. So short-termism is a massive issue that's been running through the problem, through a range of companies and through the industry at the moment. There's a range of ways to deal with that. None have been kind of encoded in stone at the moment, but that's okay. With this issue, a range of other challenges have kind of been presented from people just focusing on what metrics they can see rather than all the metrics that may be available to them. You can drive these large cyclical gaps in sales performance. Brand has been a massive loss in terms of digital. We've talked to a lot of companies who have spent millions and millions of dollars, ripped it out of their brand, pushed it into their search and their display, and wondered why after 2 years they were in a lot of trouble. And this over-reliance on digital has been a big problem that's been driven by digital attribution. So what we're going to do is just take a pause there and ask if there's any questions. We've gone over that quite quickly. There's a few bits and pieces there. We will cover digital attribution, marketing mix attribution, and long-term attribution in more detail in the next section. But for now, were there any questions on that little section? All right, thanks, Joe. I wouldn't say digital is the problem. It's not even digital performance channels per se that are the problem there. It's how people are using those metrics. So because people are able to measure the digital performance, and that's the only thing they can clearly measure, that's all they focus on. So they completely forget that there's this whole world of other information, other data they need to be using, and just narrow down on that one specific issue. And that was responding to the question of, is it your thought that digital is the problem, or would you say digital performance channels more specifically are the issue? Mark, why does something so limited seem to be so widely accepted right now? It's because it's ubiquitous. Every media agency has their own MarTech stack. The majority of those MarTech stacks are focused around digital attribution. Some kind of digital tools, digital metrics, whatever it may be. So all of these solutions have been fed into every marketing team across the globe. It's something a lot of people can get into easily, can see easily, can understand easily. But when it's sold into people, they're not told about the risks. No one's told that these are the problems that come across with this. These are the things this doesn't consider. As a lot of salespeople will do, they'll sell you a panacea. Like, this will solve all of your problems. All you need to do is spend $1 million on this tool and you'll never have any problems with marketing again. And then people buy it and it doesn't work and the salespeople disappear and they wonder what went wrong. But the reason it's so widely accepted right now is because there's been great salespeople in this space and it's something that people can see and play and touch with easily. Kakila, how do we know we're making an error in terms of long-term attribution? Great question. What we've noticed with companies in the past is we were actually able to see from their CPA that their long-term attribution was a problem. So what we found really useful for a lot of people is understanding their long-term metrics, their long-term targets through short-term measures. So if we know the direction short-term measures should head in order to hit a particular target, then we know whether or not that long-term play is working for us. When we were talking with one company about their long-term attribution, they used a range of brand metrics. So we were looking at how those were performing, how their CPAs were performing, how their joins were performing. So the CPAs were around their leads, their joins or sales were further down the funnel, and then how their retention was performing as well. So despite the fact there was an increase in spend, we could see this consistent drop in performance across all these other metrics. And from that, we were able to know that we should dial in a bit more and understand exactly what the problem there was. I hope that's answered those questions, Joe, Mark, and Kakila. Any others in there? No? Seems good for now. If there's any others, feel free to drop the questions in as we go, whenever they come to mind. And feel free to unmute yourself to ask the questions as well. Thanks, Mark. So when we talk about analytics, we try to talk about analytics across the funnel. One of the biggest problems we've noticed in companies is analytics is always stuck down in the hole. It might be because people that do analytics look like me, and we generally get caught in a basement somewhere where we can't talk to other people, which is completely understandable. From a HR perspective, that makes a lot of sense to me. From a business perspective, though, it's going to run into a few different issues. The reason for this is analytics. If you're solving it down in the bottom of a vertical, you're going to solve one tiny problem and get a little bit of value out of that. If you use analytics to solve a problem across the entire company, you're actually able to bring in people across different verticals, break down those silos, and solve problems a bit better that way. So when we're talking to these kind of things, we break it into 3 different areas. The first that we're talking about today is marketing activities, and we use marketing analytics to solve these. Essentially, using marketing analytics to help make the funnel bigger or to hit your targets better with the exact same spend. Once customers are in the funnel, you can use customer analytics. You can do segmentation, churn, retention. There's a whole bunch of modeling you can do there, which you can run through there. And then we've got holistic analytics as well. And holistic analytics is also known as corporate analytics. There's a range of ways we can describe that. It's basically tying together different parts of the business, information from across those, to solve large, ugly problems that exist across the business. The reason we started with marketing analytics here is it's often the easiest way to start an analytics journey in a company. Implementation for marketing analytics is relatively simple. You need your marketing spends, your sales, and an idea of other things that might affect you, and you can go from there. It's quick, it's simple, it gives you nice quick wins, empowers you to go to the board and ask for more money, more investment, more time, or a better seat at the table to actually push through a few other things. Joe, I'm going to jump back to your question at the end, if that's okay. So one of the issues, or one of the solutions at the moment, is digital attribution. If you're looking at marketing mix modeling or marketing attribution, it's been around for about 30 years and the techniques haven't changed a whole lot. Digital attribution is a much newer technique. The way we try and think of this is almost in terms of on a beach. Digital attribution is looking at the different grains of sand and understanding how they work together. Marketing attribution is kind of looking across the beach and understanding how groups of people coming in, the waves coming in, the wind and everything else operates together. So digital attribution is trying to understand people on a personal basis. The promise of digital attribution for a lot of media companies historically has been one-to-one personalization. So understanding the customer journey of each customer, understanding how each customer needs to be talked to, and how we can address any problem that customer might have to help convert them a bit further. Digital attribution does rely largely on third-party data, which is log-level data. With the recent announcements coming through, this will likely disappear. So cookies, third-party cookies are being removed by Google. Google, Facebook, and Apple, I believe, are all hashing a bunch of the ID that will be used to fingerprint customers normally. So it's going to become a lot more difficult for somebody out of a walled garden like Facebook or Google to understand exactly how customers are moving through and how you can target them better in the future. The risk with this is last click becomes the new standard, which once again kind of gives a strong advantage to somebody like Google. Last click attribution is whatever the last action was before the person purchased or became a lead, or you acquired them, whatever that means to you, then that gets all the credit for whatever it is you've done. So if the last thing they did was search your company, then they clicked and then they purchased, search would get all of that. And last click generally favors search. Google and Facebook both have their own data-driven attribution tools. If you have a look at Google's tool, you'll notice that any Google search comes through really strongly. YouTube comes through really strongly. And every time Google purchases another platform, it seems to come through really strongly in their attribution. Not saying there's anything wrong with their algorithms there, but potentially there's a couple of little issues. Facebook tends to have similar, let's call them eccentricities. When you're using black box solutions for these, there's a bit of a problem. One of the questions was around multi-touch attribution and how that will be done going forward. As I said, that's a really massive issue that a lot of companies are trying to solve. There's been huge companies set up around third-party data and multi-touch attribution that they just potentially won't be able to solve it all. One of the solutions to this is companies getting together a bunch of first-party data, collecting all that in one spot. I know Wesfarmers are looking at doing that at the moment. I know a couple of others are doing the same thing. And then they'll try and sell that on to other customers. So there's a couple of solutions that are coming through for that, but you'll be beholden to a large behemoth at the moment, unless some kind of token system is created or unless companies are offering people a cheaper service in order to take their marketing data. Marketing mix modeling, it's more of your short to medium term attribution here. With marketing mix modeling, you're not just looking at your media channels, you're looking at all these other little effects on the right. So things like weather forecasts, price changes, seasonal patterns, competitor spends, your macroeconomic indicators, promotions, all of these things can come together into the model. When you're looking at marketing mix modeling, you're generally looking at the effect of your spend within a 1 to 9 week window. So if you spent now, what's the 9-week impact of that going to be? If you spent 2 years ago, what was the 9-week impact of that? With marketing mix modeling, you break things down into incremental. Incremental is the short-term effect that your media has. And then there's the sub-base and your externalities as well. Externalities are things like weather forecast, competitor spends, things you don't have an impact on. Your sub-base is more of the longer-term part of your business. So if you're somebody like Coca-Cola, your incremental might be 1%. But if you're getting an increase of 1%, that's still a huge deal for someone like Coca-Cola. And their sub-base would be around 99, 98%. If you're a newer company or in a really competitive area, your sub-base is probably around 30, 40%. And your incremental might be around 30 or 40% as well. So the incremental is what you can change in the short term with your marketing. Welcome, Mitchell. Next thing we jump through to there is the long-term attribution. This is trying to understand what you can do with that sub-base. So that sub-base is made up of your long-term advertising. If any of you remember any jingle from 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I know there was a Smith's Crisps, I think it was Smith's Crisps, had a character called the Gobbledygook. He's still in my memory from 30 years. Things like that as part of your long-term advertising. No matter what you've done, that's stood on your mind that whole time. Other things that build into your long-term brand, though, are your brand health, customer experience, and your brand versus retail spend plays a big role in here as well. With the long-term modeling, what you can seek to do is understand how each of those metrics impacts not just your sales, but your leads, your prospects, everything else. With each of these attribution processes, they're not all necessarily tied to sales. Somebody like a university will do digital attribution, despite the fact they might have a 7-year lead cycle. So they might be using digital attribution to try and drive visitors to their website, understand how they're doing that better than their competitors. With marketing mix modeling, you might be trying to drive leads, you might be trying to drive conversions, or people through different parts of your funnel. So whatever the attribution is, the end goal could be anything from sales to whatever other metric you track and use consistently. Long-term modeling is far less common than any of the other attribution pieces we've seen. If you look at digital attribution, I think, as Mark was saying, most companies are using it. You'll probably see 80% of marketing agencies or marketing businesses within a company using digital attribution. You might see 20% using marketing mix modeling and marketing mix attribution. Long-term modeling, I think you'd be lucky to see 2 or 3%. Long-term view of a business is really rare, not just in marketing in general. Most people aren't planning to be in a business for 5 years. But even if you're in a business for 1 to 3 years and you're interested in more than just your bonus, long-term modeling is a really great way to get there. So the question is always, how does this help? We've tried to break this down. It's not necessarily a pretty picture, but hopefully you can understand this pretty easily. The y-axis we have here is the analytics time in weeks. So for an analytics person, how long would it take to push out one of these projects and get you time to value? For a company effort, this is if you're in the marketing team or from the business itself, what is your involvement likely to be in order to get this kind of project done? One of the first things most companies think when they think of analytics, which is a bugbear of mine, is they think dashboarding and reporting. I wouldn't call this analytics at all. This might be data, it could be data management, but I wouldn't call it analytics. In terms of dashboarding though, on the right here, you can see the average value of a media campaign, and each of these bubbles is meant to represent the multiplier effect it has on that media campaign. So if you look at dashboarding, it's just a tiny bit bigger than the average value of a media campaign. From a value return to the business, though it might get better clarity for people in the business, it doesn't give you a whole lot of extra value. And the company effort for dashboarding can take a long time. One of the reasons for this is it can be really hard to get all of your data together and in order. The other reason for this is people really want a particular type of purple or a particular blue, or it has to be just the right shade. And they will delay a dashboarding project for weeks until they find the right color. So a lot of that is purely aesthetic, which is why it can drag on a lot longer. Something like MMM, LTA, and these are they're a lot more value, but they're also quite difficult. So when we talk about attribution, digital attribution largely, which is up here, a bit of time required to set it up, a bit of effort required to set it up, not a huge amount of value. Digital attribution is almost purely driven by data science. You have machine learning models, data science models that will tell you the exact path customers are taking and help you understand exactly how you can extract more value out of that. Something like MMM and long-term attribution, total attribution being the combination of the two of those for us, something like that is art versus science. You'll see a lot of companies at the moment that are trying to do this, and they'll create an automated AI machine learning model to do their attribution for them. I'd avoid them as much as I could. And Google have tried to do this, Facebook have tried to do this. They've each run into issues. And the reason being, the closest you can get if you're building a machine-driven model to do attribution is industry benchmarks. So you might get an attribution system that does industry benchmarks, but it won't give you the best for your company. When we're looking at MMM, we need to consider not just the hard data we're getting in, but also the soft knowledge. So from a marketing perspective, you already know generally how your customers respond to you, how you reach your customers best, how they behave, how they interact with different things, what your seasonality is. These models won't understand that per se. And these will help you optimize those channels, but without capturing that soft knowledge in a business, these attribution models are generally rubbish. So if somebody's telling you they've got a program that can run this for you, feel free to test it with them. You'll see good returns in the first 3 months, most likely, and after that, it'll start to drop off. And the reason for that is they've optimized the wrong thing without understanding the long-term effects. But anyway, as we were saying here, you can see things like MMM and LTA, really short-term time in terms of analytics, short time in terms of company effort, as you're just getting the marketing spend generally and the soft knowledge from the companies there, and the same with LTA. But the value they're giving you is a lot bigger. Total attribution, combining the two of those, you can get a huge amount of value from that. And then we've got holistic customer analytics and human-centered analytics, which we'll be talking about in other webinars. So obviously a real-life example for this is quite useful. We can't talk about the industry, but a little picture might give an indication as to what the industry might be. It's not Lego, though. If that was the first guess you had, it's definitely not Lego as the industry. The client problem we had was we keep spending more and more money, but get less and less in return. This has been happening over 2 or 3 years. It's a really common refrain we hear from companies. The excuses made are often that competitors are getting stronger and stronger. There's been a disruptor in the business. There's been all these other issues. So the client tried to take a few steps themselves. The first step they did was to build dashboards. With the dashboards, they got no immediate improvement in ROI, but they were able to see that in the short term, certain things went up. If they extended it out to the whole 2 or 3 years, they would have seen that in the long term, things were going down. But they didn't generally do that. They just looked at it on a month-by-month basis and panicked each month. Next thing they did was digital attribution. So using Google Analytics, as we say here, it's working, we're going to make it. So in the first 3 months, they got a really good increase in that. And they started pushing more and more money from their budget into digital marketing tools. So into display, into search, programmatic, all of those channels. And then after about 3 months, it started to drop further and further. They put more and more money into it, and the returns they were getting were less and less. After that, they decided to bring us in. We did some MMM for them, trying to work out what channels were working best. They had 4 different customer segments, one of which was a B2B customer segment, the rest were B2C. And with these, we were trying to understand what channels they should be using. So using their exact same budget, We managed to improve their sales. In the first year, it was 20% improvement. In the second year, it was a 15% improvement. After that, mostly because of the way the company was set up, they separated their media team into digital, retail, and brand. So all three teams were competing for the same budget. Each team was trying to pitch as to why they should be getting more money, and each team was kind of tearing each other apart in trying to do this. So there was a huge question between retail and brand, which became the biggest problem as retail started to absorb digital. The brand team was saying that they're very sure brand has dropped, brand metrics were starting to drop, and they couldn't understand why, but they needed more money in order to improve it. So we worked with them. We did long-term attribution. We did a first little piece over 3 months to understand if they put some money into brand, what would be the effect on their sales. They saw a quick uplift in that, but they tried to write it off into other causes. So then we said, all right, that's fine. If you don't trust that, that's not a problem. So we got 5 different metrics, including brand health metrics, digital CPAs, sales, and a customer experience metric and a retention metric. And we built a forecast for these. So we built a 3-month forecast, a 1-year forecast, and a 2-year forecast based on different budget levels. And we were able to say confidently, if you increase your budget by 20% in the first year, you'll get a 60% return. And so surely enough, end of year 1, each of those metrics that we'd forecast were bang on within the targets. The second year, we expected a 90% increase, but they outperformed what we'd expected. So the strength of their brand, even though they're one of the biggest performers in the market already, started to outstrip everyone else they were competing with. So it's a really, really strong, valuable tool that just nobody out there is using. And the beauty of this was the long-term attribution actually helped their digital marketing a lot more, and it helped their traditional retail marketing a lot more as well. So rather than saying we need to rip money out of this in order to improve this other area, it's how can these 3 areas work together better in order to drive the business outcomes. After you've done attribution, I guess one of the questions is, where would you go from there? We always say work smarter, not harder, being generally lazy people. The first area we look at is marketing analytics, as we said, and then we move to customer analytics and holistic analytics. But the beauty of this is each of these solutions combine together. You can combine marketing and customer analytics to help you get more of the customers you want. Once you've got people into your funnel, you can use customer analytics to understand exactly what customers you want to target, feed that back into your marketing analytics, and then get more of those customers through. If you combine this with holistic analytics, you can then improve your customer lifetime value and your profitability per customer, because you know who you need to be getting through and push it through even further that way. If you combine all 3 of these, it becomes this beautiful little feedback loop, allowing you to improve every aspect of that customer journey. So from a customer never hearing of you, through to a customer repurchasing with you again and again, you create this stunning loop, and the values kind of multiply all the way through there. So I think that leads us to some questions again. And again, feel free to unmute if you want to ask a question. Joe Fraser mentioned that falling back on certain media metrics is being a challenge, especially when engaging with non-marketing teams in an organization. Isn't the use of example, the media reporting of RNF and TV, just a proxy that's easy to see and track, which is proven to move a business metric like awareness, presuming that is the goal? From a media agency, do you believe our job is to level up the business reporting, or should that fall with the marketing team to interpret? Big question, really good. So one of the problems with media metrics is a lot of them aren't that accurate. If you're looking at impressions, for instance, and a lot of people are buying on impressions, I think the last measure I saw said that 63% of impressions were false impressions. If you're getting kind of figures like that, it becomes really difficult for the rest of the business to trust the measures you're getting through. Reach and frequency in TV is another great example of that. When I worked in media, I'd see reports that were saying they got 85% reach and frequency, or 85% reach and frequency of 2 or 3 in TV. But when you started doing research on the people that had supposedly seen the ads, it was closer to 25%. So proxies like that are easy to see and track and can definitely move a business metric like awareness are useful. But I think what a media agency should be doing to help their partner, whether it's the head of marketing or the CMO, to move better with the business and to actually get better buy-in from the business, is help them understand how each of these measures relate to dollars. So rather than saying this is going to move your brand awareness, from a marketing head perspective, brand awareness might be really important. If we go back to the example we had earlier, their board told them they needed to hit a certain unprompted awareness target. But when we looked at their data, it wasn't unprompted awareness that was actually the driver. It was an entirely different metric. So awareness metrics are another difficult thing. Something that every C-suite exec understands, though, is dollars. So I think the job of a media agency, the job of a marketing team, is to put all of those metrics they get into an actual dollar figure, into an ROI, a short-term and a long-term ROI for the business. If you can do that, then you're going to get a lot more buy-in. You're going to get exactly what you want from the board. And if the board comes back to you and slashes your budget and says, you need to hit this target, you can say confidently, actually, no, we won't hit that target with that amount. With that amount, this is the target we're going to hit. If you want us to hit that target, this is the amount of money we need. If you want to hit this stretch goal, this is the amount of money we need. And if you can show the information and the backing behind that, you'll find it's a much easier journey for both the marketing team, the marketing partners you have, and for that CMO and the heads of marketing in that business to work with their board. And Matt, do you see decentralization of decision-making within a company acting as one of the biggest barriers for improvements to analytics and marketing mix planning? So these are almost two separate pieces. It's a really good question, but yeah, the decentralization of decision-making, putting everything into tiny silos and verticals, absolutely is one of the biggest issues with getting improvements in analytics. And the problem with that largely is each of those verticals will hire their own analytics people. They'll get their own tools. You'll see this with IT tools across every company. There's a website you can go to, I can't remember exactly what it is, where you can see all of the tools that Google's using. If you ever want to justify getting a certain program into your company, go to that website and just say Google's using it. Google is using absolutely every program you can ever think of because people in one vertical have decided they like that over another. If you're a smaller company than Google, which I'm guessing most of you are, these costs just begin to blow out. You get huge tech debt, but worse than that, you're not getting any useful solution across the business. You might get something in a style that's really good for that particular vertical, but the rest of the business can't use it. And then you start getting false information fed across the business, which can lead to fraud issues, reporting issues, and a whole bunch of other scary financial issues that most companies want to avoid. In terms of marketing mix planning, it really depends on how the team's set out. In situations where you're split between a brand team, a digital team, and a retail team, absolutely separating those decision-making is a huge issue for the business. It can be done really well, but certain functions of that need to be taken away from those teams. You need a solution that sits across and says, okay, here's your budget, here's your budget, here's your budget. We've determined that this is the best way to split this budget. As the head of that area, you need to determine what's the best way to spend that budget. So if you can remove some of that decision-making and use analytics to make those top-level decisions better, you can help solve those bottom-level problems a lot better. Any other major questions in there from anyone else? No, pretty quiet so far. Too easy. So there's a range of ways you can go about doing these kind of problems or dealing with these kind of solutions. A lot of you will have dealt with a few of these problems before. Struggling to understand exactly what marketing channels you should be using, how you can understand what's the best way to approach this, how to get support from your board, how to get the funding you need. If you have any questions around those things, if you want any more technical detail on these kind of pieces, feel free to contact us. Our details are there, or you can find us on LinkedIn. Just send us a message. We're always happy to help and have a chat. Michael, anything you want to add in there?
No, that was awesome. That was awesome. Thank you. I was going to ask maybe a few more pointed feedback questions within the marketing analytics framework, just to make sure we're thinking about it to our audience here. If you feel like you'd like more depth within either digital attribution, marketing mix modeling, or towards customer, way down, maybe even into the customer side, please, as we go through this, let us know, because each one of these topics in and of itself is a very, very detailed and potentially technical thing that world famous Tasman could put you to sleep with if you do need that information. So going into that, my question to you, Taz, and I feel like maybe it's more of a comment, is can you introduce customer analytics just at a very top level way so that our audience at least has an idea in our minds where we're heading next week?
Sure. I guess to talk about customer analytics simply, you're trying to understand who your customers are, where they come from, what are they interested in buying, how much do they have to spend, and how can you keep them? So obviously that's a broad swathe of questions. Historically, a lot of customer analytics has been purely demographic. So, we're trying to target 40-year-old women called Karen who want to talk to the manager. Don't know why you want to talk to them, but that might be your particular demographic. When we're talking about customer analytics these days, we're talking about more of a behavioral segmentation rather than a demographic segmentation. So we want to know who's going to buy our product in the first week, who's going to buy our product in the first month. If they're in the first week, what are the steps they're going through in interacting with us before they buy that product? If it's in the first month, what are the steps they're going through? So from a targeting perspective, from an advertising perspective, when do we have to go back to them and talk to them again? When should we remessage them? What should we message them with? How do we approach that kind of issue? How do we approach communication with these customers? The holy grail of this was always one-to-one personalization and understanding your customer down to that depth. But in reality, you're not going to send 1,000 different messages to 1,000 different people. So it's how can we break down our customers into a group where we can understand, are they high value? Are they low value? Are they likely to keep spending with us? Who do we want? How do we get them? How do we keep them? Hopefully that makes sense. Ray had a question.
Yeah, Ray's there.
Yep. Are there any particular groups that struggle more than others with the marketing analytics concepts? Who are the most challenging to bring on the journey? So there are two groups that struggle a lot with marketing analytics concepts. Unfortunately, those two groups are generally marketing and data scientists. Every time you talk to a data scientist, the first thing they're going to want to do is find a way to automate this, find a way to build this out, and find a way to productionize this. When you tell them they can't do that, they get very upset. Then they go and do it anyway and wonder why it didn't work. When you're talking to marketers about this, the bigger concern is generally that historically people have been using gut feel. They've used as much information as they've had available to them, but in the end, their final decision on the amount they're spending, the channels they're spending it on, has been purely driven by gut feel. So when you're talking to a marketing team about this kind of thing, their concern is this going to make me look like an idiot? Am I going to look like I've been screwing this up for the last 5 years, 10 years, 3 years, however long they've been there? So getting them along the journey, showing them that you're helping them to actually build their own success, and you're trying to make them look amazing as you go, is one of the most difficult things. If you're talking to the rest of the C-suite, marketing analytics gets almost instant buy-in. If you're talking to the marketing team, you're always going to get the most pushback. Media agencies are also often very reluctant to do marketing analytics, but that's more of a rebate issue than anything else.
Taz, Michael again. I got a comment actually. Oh, we got another one popping in.
Yep.
Mitchell, let's take that one.
Yeah, Mitchell, how do you see an NPS program playing a role in your customer analytics equation? NPS is a difficult one. NPS, much like brand health metrics, can be good, can be terrible. NPS in and by itself, I don't believe is particularly useful. Customer experience score is basically becoming the new NPS as well. When it becomes useful, though, is when you actually start tying it through to other metrics. So if you're tracking your NPS, the assumption is a better NPS is going to get you better sales or better leads or better customer experience, better retention, whatever the case is. But until you've actually shown what that is, NPS by itself isn't necessarily a great metric. So if you measure NPS against the rest of your customer success metrics, then it becomes really useful. And you can say, all right, if I spend $100,000 to improve NPS from 7 to 8, what's the outcome going to be for my business? Whereas for a lot of companies at the moment, it's, I need to improve my NPS, and no one's asking that next question of why and what's the return we're going to get on that. So NPS, like a lot of other metrics, can be great. It just depends on how that next step is used. Does that answer your question there, Mitchell?
Feel free, guys, to jump on the microphone as well and not make Taz feel like he's all alone talking.
Yeah, sure. Well, Bain & Company, of course, the founders of NPS, going back whatever it was, 25 years ago, will say NPS is the best predictor of future growth.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very simple metric where you can galvanize focus and attention around, which does have its benefits when people are challenged with complexity. What do you think of customer effort score?
What's that, sorry?
What do you think of the customer effort score?
Again, all of these scores are really good for particular situations to measure certain things. If you're not, like, customer effort's a bit more useful, I think, in understanding that journey and helping optimize that journey. But if you've optimized that journey and you've still not seen a increase in your sales, increase in your conversions, what was the point of using the customer effort score in the first place? So there's hundreds of really good metrics out there that can be used, but tying them through to something that's of value for you. So when Bain & Co. used that score, they're looking at large corporates, generally, and they're looking at how they're competing against other large corporates. Mm-hmm. For some of those large corporates, that would work amazingly well if they're in a particular industry, if they've got certain other success metrics in place. But the advice for each of those large corporates would be to measure exactly the effect it has on them rather than on an industry as a whole. Mm-hmm. So with the example we were giving with the company beforehand, where they had a focus on unprofitable awareness, their board got that idea from a conference they went to and said their score had to be 38% because that's what they got told at the conference.
Sure.
Without actually tying it through to or having a look at how it was driving anything of their own.
Sure.
So it's just like there's a world of metrics you can use.
Indeed.
And some are great, some are useful, some aren't. But whatever metric I'd use, I'd measure for a while and then I test it against other things. So I'm not going to say one's useful, one's not useful. It's just what's useful for you and what's useful in driving whatever it is you need to drive.
Sure. Thank you.
No worries.
And great content. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitchell.
Yeah, I think, Taz, I mean, that's on the idea of your comment that this is an artistic enterprise a little bit, so much as it is necessarily a scientific endeavor, right? So I think that's very important to make sure we keep in context.
Yeah. Yeah, you need to capture that soft knowledge, but you need to test and learn from there.
Yeah. It's a mixture of both, yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, maybe, I know that there's a few minutes left here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm just trying to see if we can get any other questions eked out of anyone who's maybe a little shy. Taz, could you go to the slide with the XY axis where we have the different analytics concepts and the value that goes on? Because I feel like there's just an awful lot wrapped up or could be wrapped up here, despite your efforts to make sure that everyone knows how much you dislike dashboarding. I think that there's quite a lot of discussion here. So let me just ask you a little bit about the changes. I know we highlighted a little bit, but the changes in what total attribution is for holistic analytics and what it is for other people.
Yeah, traditionally total attribution has been combining digital attribution with MMM. We think this is useful to a degree, but we think it's probably looking at the wrong ends of the channel. For us, when we talk about total attribution, it's combining long-term attribution with MMM. So when you are making a media campaign, you're not just thinking about how do I drive my sales now, it's how do I drive my sales now and in a year's time. So every media campaign you're running has part of a brand element to it potentially. Or if you're not running a brand element to it, what media campaigns do you need to have a brand element in? How often do you need to run that brand element? How often do you need to have that brand spend? So from there, you're able to make these full year media plans, understanding fully, we need to do brand here, we need to do retail here, and exactly how you break it out. Something like digital generally runs all the time. It's always on, which is why it doesn't necessarily fit into that kind of attribution tool.
Is there anything on a commentary about, I know that some of the questions have already hit on it, which I think were great questions, by the way, about the structure of the team and any maybe big no-nos that you would say for the structure of the team that keeps that from coming to fruition?
I think the biggest issue with structuring a team is when you're trying to get everyone to justify their own budget. You're looking at each team's analytics separately. You're not trying to look at them all together. So even if you're running separate teams, you can't try and combine everything. You can't try and let them each do their own analytics, because the metrics they're looking at will be different. What they think is success will be different across each of them. And that's just going to absolutely kill you. So when you're doing that, you need to bring everything together in a way. You need to have a single success metric that can be used across all three areas. And ideally, you will have one for long-term attribution that then helps drive one for marketing mix modeling. So you've got this shared dependency across the three of them, or across the different areas you're running. And with that shared dependency, then you can see how they need to work together. And that shared dependency needs to be one of the key KPIs for each of the parts.
Makes sense.
Any other questions before we sign off?
Big thank you, Joe and Mark and all the guys for the guys and gals and everyone for their questions and their interaction with us. I think that was fantastic. Thank you for supporting us. I'll just say my parting piece is that I hope everyone is doing well, of course, and the best that you can. And try to remember that this soon will pass, and we're going to be back to business. And Holistic Analytics is going to do our best to help provide some structure in the next few weeks with learning. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for your time, guys. Hopefully we'll see you next week.